Welcome to the video lecture series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. This series is based on the title of the history of two cultures. What we're basing it on is a quote from Stephen Jay Gould, where he says, "First, facts do not come to us as objective items seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people. Theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them." This is what the image is on this side is. First, I have questions. I have questions about myself. Where did I come from? What am I supposed to do while I'm here? And where do I go after death? Is there an after death? And so those questions like that, we can invite and often do an expert to come in and to study the world to give us the answers. And before, I thought that the answers given were pretty much objective, unbiased, and neutral. But through Stephen Jay Gould's quote saying that not all reasonable people see things the same way, meaning that there are differences in that we as humans cannot isolate off our personality, our personhood from our actions, from our work, from what we do. And therefore, when we invite an expert in, that is a person that is going to be studying and then giving his interpretation, but influenced by those four factors mentioned by Stephen Jay Gould. This now gave me a tools to be able to understand different authors and to be able to understand different scientific models by applying what Stephen Jay Gould has given us by those four factors and how they influence even reasonable people, and how those four factors can influence the interpretation process, the perception process. So that is what this series is about, is diving into those four factors and trying to understand how those four factors can combine to influence our thinking processes, and not just our thinking, but our perception processes. Of those four factors, theory, habit, prejudice, and culture, we're going to start with culture. Even though culture is in the last of the list of Stephen Jay Gould, I believe culture is the basis for forming the thought processes. We've worked 25 years cross-culturally as educators, and we've learned the hard way that culture does influence thinking processes, does perception processes, reading processes, comprehension processes, and that I as a teacher have to change and adapt my methods to their way of learning. And so this is where I understand that culture has a major influence. And so when Stephen Jay Gould mentioned the theory, habit, prejudice, and culture, I said, yeah, I understand that. Culture is a big factor. So we're starting with culture. And what we're going to do is look at culture and studying culture, reading upon culture. We find out that there exists two main divisions within the concept of culture. And that is Western culture, and I didn't know what the second one could be called or would be called, so I've just labeled it for now kind of non-Western culture, not meaning that it's a negative term, but just meaning that Western culture dominates our educational model, dominates our thinking, our much of what we do is dominated by Western culture. But then the question is, well, what do you mean by Western culture? Does that mean it's geographical location, that the countries that are west do it this way and the countries that are east do it that way, and it's kind of like today? No, it has no reference to geographical location, but in the very beginning, yes, it did. Why Western culture? Western culture comes from ancient Greece. Ancient Greece was west of the Old World. The Old World meaning the the near, the middle, and the far eastern countries. That is where civilization began, in many of the Mesopotamian Valley and through there, where they were conservative. They practiced a culture in cycles, and they thought in basically the same kind of way. And they were very religious people. They were very spiritually based. And so that is, to them, they practiced something for thousands of years, and they would live and practice the same thing. They were very conservative. Greece, on its part, wanted to change that. And so we're going to get into it, but there was a movement, intellectual movement, that said, yeah, no more gods, no more mythology, no more miracles, no more authority, no more. And so they changed things, and they became different. And where were they? They were west of those conservative countries. And so therefore Greece was west, and therefore everything that came out of Greece was therefore called Western culture. And so that is today that influence, Greek influence, still continues in our format of thinking, in our philosophy, in our educational models, in a lot of what we do. It follows what Greece had introduced, what Greece had developed. So therefore, we are Western. I am Western. I didn't know that before, what it really meant, but I follow and have been educated mostly in the Western educational model. Non-Western culture. Where does that come from? Well, again, that comes from the near, middle, and far eastern countries. And that covers a lot of territory. A lot of them, though, shared many commonalities within themselves as being cultures and what their belief systems were like. For the purposes of this study, the non-Western culture will be represented by a culture that I've had the privilege of studying more in depth about, because there's more information about, and it is a history of my belief system. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Hebrew nation, and that is going to represent the non-Western culture and its belief systems. Now, not all non-Western cultures believed this way. What I'm doing is saying they are non-Western in their tendency, but we're looking at the Hebrew nation and its belief system. When looking at a belief system or looking at a culture, we go to the first core of its of how it functions, and that is its source of reliable knowledge. Where do I go? Where did they go for their source of reliable knowledge? Now, in philosophy, that's called epistemology. Epistemology it has to do with knowledge. How do we get knowledge? How do we get to information that is reliable? And so that is epistemological source. What would be their epistemology, their source of knowledge? And for them, it was their God. It was their God who had revealed himself to his people, to his spokespeople, to his prophets, and the prophets later recorded that conversation, recorded that revelation in what has become the scriptures of what we read today. So the Word of God came to the prophets, and that resulted in what we have today and recorded in the scriptures. But God revealed himself in two ways. One was directly, be a special revelation, but also through what he had created. And so that is called general revelation. So God revealed himself to his people through those two methods. So what did this source tell them about their reality? That is what we're going to get into in the next section. What did this source tell them? Now, the other cultures did not share the same source. They all had their different sources, but they basically all believed in a spiritual reality that governed most of their life, where the far east or the far west end, which was now Greece, was separating from that. They were separating from the myths. They were separating themselves from the superstitions, or what they call it, of the eastern countries. So that is what we have as a divide between the Western and non-Western cultures. And what we're going to get into in the next series, we're going to look at the non-Western, then we'll go into the Western, and then we're going to look at the interfacing between those two cultures, the Western and non-Western through history. Thanks for joining me. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. We can be reached at either email, thn.academia@gmail.com, or through the blog spot at www.doubleroadrover.com. Thanks again for joining me. This is the first out of 8 segments, series that we're going to be going into on the history of two cultures.